This is a conversation with Neena on June 3rd, 2020.
Hello, I'm Evalyn Ward, and I'm very excited to be here with my granddaughter Olivia Johnson. I'm so proud of her for her standing up for the rights and for the process of racial reconciliation. And she asked me to tell my story, and since I have been around a long time, I have a lot to say. And so I'll just begin with the first question. She asked me, please tell me a little bit about yourself. I grew up in Columbus, Georgia, and I lived there until I was graduated from college. I actually went to college there. I got a college degree in teaching, and I taught school for many, many years in the public schools and in the private schools. The jobs that I've had many. I had a daycare. I had mostly teaching though. Phone call.
Oh no, that's okay.
Stop it.
All right. So yeah, you've always been from the South, and that's kind of shaped your...
It has. Growing up, how was race talked about in your family? We really didn't realize that we were racist. I don't think anybody did. We lived in our neighborhood. They lived in their neighborhood, they being people of color. We also went to church separately, to schools separately. There was no integration anywhere. I had no understanding of people of color, no interaction with them. Even in college, all of my years in college, I didn't really run across very many people of color. And I would like to, growing up, race was not talked about. My dad had a job where he was he ran the maintenance department of a public school system. So most of his employees were black because they were the janitors and the people the custodians of the school. And he was racist. I mean, you know, that word can mean anything to anybody, and everybody is. So I'm not using that in a derogatory term for him, but he also grew up in the generation before that, and so he considered them less than him. I know that he did, but he treated them fairly. He treated people of color. He fought for their rights to get more pay. He did things like that. But as far as interacting with them on a level different from work, that was just not at all considered. I had nobody of color in my life during those times. The only person of color that I even knew was my next door neighbor had a maid. And she came to the neighborhood every day on a bus, and she stayed all day, and then she got on the bus at the end of the day and went back to her neighborhood. So my friend and I would play in the house, and we talked to her and interacted with her some, but she was the hired help. And so that's the role that she played, so I really never gave it much thought. So that's pretty much the way the South was. It was totally segregated, at least in my world. There were some places that were not that segregated, but in my world, it was totally segregated. I learned things from my parents because you always learn from your parents. You learn in very unobvious ways. You learn their attitudes. You learn that they're not, and so I did learn from them. One thing that I did want to say is there was a little saying that I said as a child from age as long as I can remember, and I'm ashamed to say all the way till I was an adult. But there's a little poem that we used to say, eeny, meeny, miny, moe. And we say that today too, eeny, meeny, miny, moe, when you're counting something. but and you don't know which to pick. You just say eeny, meeny, miny, mo. But what we did, ours was eeny, meeny, miny, mo, catch an in by his toe. If he hollers, let him go. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo. And that is the only one of those that I ever heard, and I used it all the time. When you come to two things, you just automatically say eeny, meeny, miny, mo. And all of a sudden, when I was adult, I realized that's not a nice thing to say. And so I don't know what brought me to that point, but I do remember thinking that's not appropriate. But I still did not know any people of color. My first interaction with people of color was when I had a daycare, and it was over in Casey. I started this daycare with a friend of mine. I had my daughter Cheryl was a year old, and I didn't want to leave her, and I couldn't get a job teaching anyway, so I just opened a daycare. It was very successful. We had like 70 people, children, and we had a lot of employees. And I always had a policy of open enrollment. Anybody could come. I had probably 20, that was back in the 70s, the late 70s. I had probably 25% black or people of color in my daycare. I loved them just as much. I invited them to church with me. I took them to church with me. In fact, I think I made a difference for some of those. I ran into one of the students we had years later at Richland Mall, and he remembered me, and he said, "You treated me with such respect." He was a little boy then. So I think that my beliefs were changing, or maybe I never even had any beliefs. Maybe I didn't know what my beliefs were. But gradually I'm beginning to develop my beliefs, and I'm thinking, okay, these people are just exactly like us, and they're God's children, and they deserve everything that we have. And so I began, in fact, my daughter Cheryl was best friends with a little black girl in our daycare, and when I had my son and I was in the hospital, she called me and asked me if he was black or white. And I thought that was so neat. That made my heart happy, because she did not realize the difference there between, at that point, I don't think she realized race as much as some children do. Certainly not as much as I did when I was her age. And so, and then we went on, and one other thing that I did want to say was that whenever I graduated from high school was the year, that was 1966, and the next year our school system started the busing. And so they brought black children from across the city over to our school, which didn't affect me because I had just graduated and moved on to an all-white college. So it was a local college, it was a community college. But anyway, I can remember thinking, that's not fair. I really didn't like that. I had something rise up in me and said, no, they, meaning the people of color, do not have to come to our schools. They have their own schools. And so that was a little bit of a racist attitude there. And I accepted, and looking back, I was very resentful, but it didn't affect me personally. If I had still been in school, it might have made me much more strongly feel that way than I did, because I was out. I do remember the 1960s. I remember Martin Luther King. I remember many of the peaceful things that went on, like the Selma Bridge and all of those.
How old were you when that was happening?
In the 60s, 40, 50, I was probably 12, 13, 14.
Okay, so you're like in middle school, just kind of watching this stuff happen, and
right.
Kind of having your own opinions, but mostly just watching and like having your parents' opinions, because I feel like that's very common for that age. That is. That's exactly what it is. You're watching TV with them, and they have their opinions, and you develop their opinions. Mm-hmm.
And I just remember, I do remember when the 4 little girls were killed in the church bombing, and I think I remember I've always had such an empathy for people that die or that are killed, and so I remember really mourning the loss of those little girls and thinking that's not right. And I do remember the KKK as far as pictures on TV. I never came in contact with them. But I do have a friend that had them come to their house and burn a cross on her front yard. And when she was 5.
And
she was in Columbus.
Was she a person of color?
No, she was white.
Why did
and
they
her
do
father, her father, she moved down to Columbus from New Jersey, and her father had developed a friendship through the theatrical group in Columbia of a medical doctor that was black. And he invited the black actor and doctor and his whole family over to his house for dinner.
Oh my gosh.
And she was just 5 or 6 years old. She just told me this story. I didn't know her at that time. But she said they looked out their window and they saw the white Ku Klux Klan all over their yard burning a cross right after that. And it scared her really bad because she thought they were going to burn their house down. So that was about the only thing that I can relate to the KKK. Nobody in my family that I know of ever had any part in that. Of course, distant relatives from back farther than that did. And one thing that I have learned as I have, as I started this journey, and I'll just tell you just a minute about my journey. After I had the African Americans in my daycare, I was beginning to change my attitude. Then our church, our local church that I go to, Columbia First Nazarene.
Sure, you can get a shout out. There you go.
We just started having black families coming into our church, and very, very wonderful people, and I became friends with them. And one of them was named Cynthia Goodwin, and she and I did a quizzing program at church together, and Sylvia White was also one of them, and we did quizzing together with the children, all the children of the church. And I just loved these people, and I think I loved them, and the thing that was really, when I would go to a restaurant with them, and now this is after Olivia was born, this was in the early 2000s. I remember going to restaurants with them, and that was even before people started doing that, but I just was so proud, and I would go home and think, that's not a good feeling just to be proud because you're going to supper with a person of color, which might have been a little bit of tokenism I just learned about last night.
Oh my gosh!
So I'm still learning every single day. I kept thinking, why am I so happy and proud that I'm walking into this restaurant with someone that's of color? And just last night, I read an article, my friend Allison Bowden put it on there, and it says that's a form of tokenism. And so I'm praying that God will help me not to have that feeling either. I don't want to have that feeling. But anyway, I met people of color. We started teaching children in the quizzing. I got closer and closer to many, many, many African American families. And so that definitely had a big part in changing my feelings about it. And at that time, I would say to anybody, I am not a racist. That was my thing to say. Well, I have learned now that I am a racist and that we all are, but I didn't know that at the time. And so I would proudly say that because I did not wish them harm. I thought they were equal to us. And I don't know why I would be a racist. I didn't want them. I didn't know a lot that was going on either. A lot of it was ignorance. There's a huge amount of ignorance in this world right now, even today. And so I just didn't know that all that was going on. All I knew is these people. But these people I didn't really, these African Americans that were people of color that I was working with, I did not interact with them much in another world. That was just their world at church we interacted, but our worlds didn't join together. So then that continued for several years, and I'm just, you can edit this out later if you want to, but I want to tell this story. We started a ministry with the children in our church neighborhoods that were low income, really poor kids. We would pick them up on the buses, bring them to church, feed them supper, and then teach them about the Bible, and then take them back home. And adults would love on them and teach them, and it was just a beautiful thing. I loved it. I wasn't really a part of that program, though. I was a part of the church. The church kids, we had people of color in our quizzing in the church. And so this group was called the St. Andrews group, and they were different because they came on the bus. And I even found out later that at times they even had to eat at different tables. But I was never over there. I didn't know anything about it. And they had separate teachers that taught them. And so one night, on a Wednesday night, a guy, Cynthia Goodwin's husband, Charles Goodwin, came up to me and said, Evalyn, one of our little kids that's in first grade has got to be friends with one of the little first graders in your quizzing group. Could she come and join your quizzing group? And I said, you know what, Charles, we don't really have room, and I just don't think that would be a good idea. What if the rest of them wanted to come and we don't have enough teachers, and blah, blah, blah. And so when I got home that night and I went to bed in the middle of the night, God woke me up. And this is all a God thing for me, because he's the one that's taught me, not anybody else. God just slapped me across my face and said, how dare you tell that child she can't come into your class because you don't have room? And I was just so sorry and mournful that I had said that, but I just did not have any time to even think about it ahead of time. I just didn't know. So the very next morning, I called Cynthia Goodwin, who was my friend, and I said, Cynthia, your husband asked me if this child could come, and I said no. And I said, God told me last night that that child can come, and every one of them can come. And she started crying on the other side of the phone. And she said, Evalyn, you don't know how many years I have prayed for that. I mean, this program had been going on for like 10 years, and at no time had the groups been joined together. And that's really not exactly integration, but it sort of is. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But anyway, she cried the very next Wednesday night. We had all those kids in there, but God wanted me to do it. And so I'm going to do what he says. So we persevered. We had the chocolate candy things that we did with everybody. We did all kinds of experiments, and they loved it. And we grew to love them. This was like in the spring one year. So starting in the fall that year, there was just no question. They were all together. There was never a division. There was never teachers for two different groups. So that was another point where God is saying, okay, Evalyn, you're wrong about this. You need to change your mind. And so then the thing that she, how have your thoughts changed as you grew to adulthood? I've talked about that.
Yeah, kind of that whole process.
Okay, the thing that brought me to the point I'm at now was 6 months ago. Mm-hmm. I was watching, one of my friends asked me to watch a video on white privilege, and it's by Chelsea Handler. Mm-hmm. And she said, I've watched it, and I just can't believe it, Evalyn. At the end and so I went home. I always watch what people ask me to watch because I want to know. I'm just thirsty for knowledge and information. So I watched it, and at the end of it, Chelsea Handler keeps saying, white people are the ones that need to do something. White people need to have conversations. And I thought, I can't see how that would help anything. But that's what she said. And so God started putting on my heart, Evalyn, I want you to do that. I could not find anybody that knew anything about this particular problem. It's unbelievable, the ignorance. I walked through my church for a month and a half, and I asked people, I would walk up to them and I would say, have you ever seen the video White Privilege? And they would say no. And I would say, well, why don't you go home and watch it and then come back and talk to me and tell me what you think, because God is speaking to me and wants me to do something about it.
Before we move on, will you say just a couple things in that documentary that kind of opened your eyes that you hadn't realized were going on in America? Because I think that really, it seems like that changed, because I remember having a conversation with you Thanksgiving, I think maybe 2018, and we were talking about Black Lives Matter, and you had brought up that, you thought all life was important and you didn't understand. So what were some of those things in that documentary that really helped change that mindset for you?
I'm glad you said that, Olivia, because I wanted to put that in there. I do remember when Black Lives Matter came up.
Yeah.
And I do remember being resistive to that and saying all lives matter. I think that is very, very wrong to say Black Lives Matter. So you're right. A year before this happened, I was still thinking things that were not the right way to think, but that's how I was.
Yeah.
And everybody. But when I saw that video, several things that she talked about, excuse me, the fact that so many Black Americans are in prison. Mm-hmm. And even my son, who is a minister, had told me 5 years ago, Mother, there's so many more Black people in jail than white people. And I would say, well, they committed the crimes. That's what people say. And I believed that. And so she interviewed the New Jersey governor. She interviewed all kinds of people, and they would say the percentages. And it was just ridiculously unbelievable that many. Even in New Jersey, there were so many more young people that were in prison that were not the same as the Black people as compared to white people. And so she also talked about this boyfriend of hers that she had when she was a young adult. She was pretty bad as a young adult. She was
wild.
Pretty wild, I'll put it that way. She was running around doing drugs, some, not bad drugs, but she and her boyfriend would be pulled over, and they would, the cops would arrest him and not her, and she was in the car, and she had drugs on her too. And so
her boyfriend is Black.
And her boyfriend was Black, and she began to realize that she was privileged. She didn't know that until that happened. And then she started doing research and finding out, and she loved that boyfriend of hers. In fact, in the movie, she goes back to see him, and he did spend many years, like 14 years in jail for his, for crimes that a white person would not have been put in jail for. And so, and then I had, then another thing, I watched another video called 13th, and it talks about some of the the legislation that was passed was like the 3 counts and you're out was specifically for people of color to get put in jail for life, because the particular, I didn't know this, but the particular things that they were charged for were put in like crack compared to another. I don't know the exact ones. We might put that in there, but they picked the ones that the African Americans would be guilty of. Mm-hmm. And that's the ones that were under the 3 strikes and you're out.
Wow.
The other drugs, similar drugs, same drugs, weren't under that law. So then that meant, and another thing that I just want to say, that I learned from her, was that when the Civil War was over, the white planters didn't have anybody to do their work, and they were very upset. And so what they did is pass legislation that used prison help. And they contracted with the state to use the prison help to do their fields. Well, then they needed prisoners. So they made rules and they started arresting Black Americans.
Those were the black codes and like Jim Crow laws
Right.
and black codes talking about.
Yeah, so what they did was they just got filled up the prisons with black people. Then they used them to work in their fields. So that was still slavery.
Yeah.
I had never ever heard anything like that. So she just changed my life because I saw that there was a lot I didn't know. And so at that point, I started going around to the church people, and I got answers like, "You don't believe in white privilege, do you?" And these are well-respected people in my church. I would not tell you any names, but and I would say to somebody, do you know what it's like to black people are afraid to send their kids out at night to get a Coke because they'll be arrested and or maybe killed. And this one woman said to me, I was scared every time my son went out. Now, she was white. And I said, I was scared every time my son went out, but I wasn't scared the police would kill him.
Yeah.
I was scared he would have a wreck or maybe get into trouble, but I was never scared. And so I just began to realize there's a lot of people that aren't even near on this page yet. And so I just kept talking to people, and so I remember talking to one lady, and I said, and she said, well, what are your plans with this program that you're getting ready to start? And I said, I have no plans. I said, God told me to get on this train, and he said, I'm leading it, and you don't even have to know where it's going. You just get on it. And so I said, okay, I'll do it. So I said, I have no plans. Well, I finally decided to set up a meeting, and I had found 16 people that were interested in being a part of it. Some were African American, some were white, and I wanted it to be a mixture and a good group. But I wanted it people that would be interested in this topic. So we were ready to have our first meeting, and I had no curriculum. I had no idea what to do. And I called this lady in our church that is named Mandy Bruce. She's the same age as my daughter. And I said, telling Mandy about it and asking her if she wanted to be a part of the group, and she started crying. And she said, Evalyn, God's been telling me for 2 years to do that, and I'm chicken to do it. And I know the curriculum you need, and I know where it is. It's called Be the Bridge. It's on the internet. There are groups like that all across the world now. It only started 2 years ago. And I just started crying then. I said, okay, we've got our curriculum, we've got our group. So we had our first meeting in December. And it was strenuous. It was difficult. Some of the people of color in there were angry. And we tried to listen. And then some of the others had white fragility, which is, I'm learning. I taught a course in this class, in this Be the Bridge group. My job was to teach a course, and it had 4 parts: white fragility, white, what was it? Privilege, yes, white supremacy, and one other one. But anyway, I taught those classes, and as I taught those classes, I learned more and more and more. And then I just started ordering books and reading and watching videos and watching. There's a woman that teaches about white supremacy, and her name is Dr. Robin DeAngelo. And she has got the best videos on YouTube about it. I learned a lot from her. And the most interesting thing I learned from her was she tells this story that she's done this for 30 years in her life. That's her life goal, is to help companies with reconciliation. And she made a mistake, and she admitted it. She made a flippant comment in a conference about a black woman's hair. And the black woman later on called her on it.
Yeah.
And she said, wow, I cannot believe I did that. And so she went back and showed how to make it right when you do make a mistake. Because we all make mistakes. We're working towards something and we have a goal, but we're not there yet. So we have continued to work, and let's see, that's how I've gone about educating myself, and also white privilege is something that I really never knew what it meant, and that was one of the things that I was talking about in this message that my very first one. And it says, so I won't stay silent and let the sin of racism ravage when God created us as good. Reconciliation continues when we empty ourselves of our pride as well as our need to be right or to be felt and understood. So what has come out of this Be the Bridge group is the first assignment we had was we divided into two, and every two, like an African American and a white person went to supper together. And they came back to me later. We drew names out of a hat. That's how we did it. They came back to me later and they said that every one of them said that was the most wonderful experience because they learned so much. And see what we do, even if we're in an integrated society, even if we're in an integrated church, we need to integrate our lives where we are part of their life and we understand. And so I feel like, so that's where white supremacy is nothing more than just thinking that you're better than, that you deserve it, you deserve everything. And because you're white, and most people don't realize they have that in them. They just don't think about it.
Yeah.
And let's see, there was one other thing I was going to say. In our meetings, just lately, have been very meaningful. Since Armand Arbery died, I just cried over that. And and I was talking to the other women about it at one of our meetings, and then when this happened, I just, with George Floyd, and I just remember just saying, it's just so wrong and hurts so bad. And one of the black ladies in our group spoke up and said, Evalyn, you just don't know how much it means to a black person to hear a white person say it hurts and that you care and that you're concerned and that you're mourning just like we're mourning. And I thought, I didn't realize that. And so I've realized gradually that there's a lot more to learn. There's a lot more and what has been going on Facebook and on the internet and everywhere. It's just, it just breaks my heart literally in two, because we are all children of God and we are all the same on the inside. And I don't believe in any kind of cruelty to any race. I don't know if you want me to say this, but I also feel very strongly about the Navajo Indians. I feel like we as Americans, see, we're the white supremacy, back to that, you can edit this, but back to that, the white supremacy, we came into this country and took it from them, literally, because we were white Europeans and we had the right to have it. And they didn't, even though they'd lived here millions of years. And then in another time that we did that was whenever we needed slaves, so we brought in slaves, and so that was for us. And then whenever we had World War II, we took all the Japanese and put them in internment camps. And so we've had a very bad history of what we have done in our white supremacy. And we have just, we have acted like we are better than anybody in the world, and everything is owed to us. And so, therefore, the Navajo Indian Reservation is out there. They have more sickness, they have more death, they have the coronavirus has gotten out there. And one thing that broke my heart just recently was I read that Doctors Without Borders have come to this country to help the Navajo Indians. And I'm thinking that's the first time they have ever had to come to our country. I have seen them go to Syria and minister to the Syrians, refugees. I've seen them go a lot of different places, but they have never had to come to our country. But there's nobody out there helping them with their coronavirus. And they have more people dying per person with the coronavirus on the Navajo Indians than New York had, percentage-wise. Yeah. And they have no help, and they have no way to divide them. They don't even have running water. They have to go get their water to wash their hands. So something needs to be done about that. I'm very upset about that also. And so I have told this group, that this Be the Bridge group that I have, it's a wonderful group of women that are dedicated to find the answers and to educate ourselves. One woman in our group last week that has been so wonderful in our group said God had spoken to her and she realized there was still racism in her. Yeah. And she got down on her knees and begged God to help her erase every kind of racism in her heart. And this is somebody that's advocating for reconciliation. Mm-hmm. So the group that we have is very dedicated to it. And I've asked them, number one, to find out about the Navajo Indians. I want them to research, find out more about what's being done for all the Indians, not just the Navajo Indians. Also, are they really Native Americans? Also, I have wanted to, there was a young man that was killed in Columbia. His name is Joshua Ruffin.
I've heard of him.
Mm-hmm. I saw some signs yesterday downtown for him. I saw the video April the 8th when the police, they just broke into the whatever I was watching and said, they showed the video camera of the officer running after him with his gun pulled. He's running that way. Another officer's running after him. And and then the next thing I hear, he was shot and he was dead. And so Skip Holbrook came on the news the next day, and I happened to see that also. And he said, we're going to let y'all know what happened. We know he was shot from the front, so that means he did turn around. We know he had a gun, and we know he had a woman's purse in his pocketbook. In his hands. And so he said, we will definitely get to the bottom of this, and we will let you know. Well, nothing else has been said, and that was April the 9th. So I asked my ladies, I said, start looking. Try to find what you can find. Talk to some lawyers. Talk to some bigwigs in SLED. I just want to know, if he did pull a gun and try to shoot, then okay, that's fine. But I think it's very possible that he could have turned around, raised his hands, yep, and they shot him, and then they found he had a gun, and they thought, oh yeah, he had a gun. And I'm not saying that all police officers are bad, because they're not. But the fact that they have not brought it back up. And so one of my ladies found a little excerpt written by his mother. And I read it, and I just cried, because she said, I have not heard another word about Joshua. And see, I think they're sweeping it under the rug, because if they did know something, they would have come forward with it. So and then this happens with George Floyd. And I just think that it is just a terrible time in our country, but there is also hope. There is hope because God Almighty is involved. He is working to help. And in poor, ignorant people like me, he comes to me last fall and says, look, I want you to do this. And I'm thinking, I don't want to do that. And I think he's speaking to other people too. He's speaking to pastors. He's speaking to national people like Beth Moore. There are many, many Christian people that are standing up saying this cannot be. the church is responsible, because all of these years in this problem, the church has stood on the wrong side. And if the church doesn't stand up and get on the right side, then we're going to fail, because that is our job. And I'm so proud. It makes me very proud to see people that are really standing up. When somebody like Kyle stands up there and preaches that kind of a message, there's hope. Because and then what he did at the end of the message was, he said, I want anybody that feels like they have been wrong and they have wronged other people, even in the past. That was another thing that was confusing me. How can we make it up to them for all the terrible things we've done over these years? I can't go back and change. I used to say that. I can't go back and change it. And that brings me to the statue down at the State House. You know, Olivia, I have told Olivia that there's a statue down at the State House with Ben Tillman on there. I mean, it's a Ben Tillman statue, and he was a racist, a very bad racist, and in my family history, but not in my direct line, but he was in our family history, and I was proud of that. Of course, I did not know his whole past. I only knew he helped start Clemson. I only knew that he was a governor. I didn't know that he went on lynching mobs. And so they are really, we need to take down those statues. And I can remember when they started taking down statues, I said, you can't go back and undo the history. But we can't undo the history. But what we can do is say we're sorry. Stop glorifying it. And so Pastor Kyle said, if you feel like you want to ask God to forgive you for anything that your family or you or anybody in the past has done to Black Americans or anybody, come to the altar and pray. And the altar was full. Now that gives me hope. All of the people that went up there, including me, were saying, okay, I have done things, knowingly or unknowingly. And I'm asking God to forgive me, and I'm asking God to show me what I need to do for the future. And so that's how I feel about this. I feel like God is calling an army of people in the backgrounds to come forward little by little and change the way we think. And I know that this is happening because a friend of mine called me last Saturday, and I'll end with this. That is racist and or has been in the past, as I said I was too. And she said, Evalyn, I realize you're right and I'm wrong. And I was just overwhelmed, and I've been seeing what she's posting on Facebook, and I'm thinking, yay, it can happen. And I said, Deborah, I was wrong. I mean, we're all wrong. Let's don't get into the guilt game of saying, well, I didn't do anything, or I did do something. We all have. And if we open our hearts and we look at the facts, and if we look at the world that we're living in right now, there is hope that it can change. I really believe that. So even though we've had a very sordid past, we've had terrible things happen, and I'm sure some more will happen. But I do want to say, too, that I believe that 95% of the police force is good. I really do. I believe.
How do you feel about the way they've been treating protesters and the militarization of the police force against peaceful protesters?
I would say that some of that was instigated by Trump. And Trump,
I have some videos of the protests I want to show you.
Okay.
That can be our next thing we're working on.
Well, they really, yes, well, maybe not 95%, but there is a big percentage. They have shown police officers hand in hand with the protesters. Mm-hmm. They have shown them laying down with them. They have shown them hugging them. And the mayor of Atlanta gave a very, very good press conference last week. And I heard an interview with her last night by Dr. Sanjay Gupta, and she said that. She said she believes that most of them are good, there are just some bad.
You want to give a final statement?
I just think there's hope. That's what my statement is. Let's keep on trying to change. Let's keep on coming together. Let's keep on opening our eyes and our hearts to what we're doing that we shouldn't be doing, and what we need to know that we don't know because of ignorance. I think that ignorance is the biggest problem. People don't know. So,
to help
thank
them
you.
know.
Yes.
No, thank you, Neena.